Alright, so we continue with our main position, d4, d5, c4, c6, c6, knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, a6, and now we look at the variation bishop g5. So here playing e6 is not so good because of e4. d takes e4, knight takes e4, and white has small advantage, as opposed to the variation where we have seen it with a4 and a5, because there the square b4 was weakened. Here it is not, so we shouldn't do it. Instead, after bishop g5, we have to play knight e4. So white has three possibilities to play. The main move is bishop f4, however there are two good alternatives. The first is h4. Of course we do not want to take the bishop on g5, because after h takes g5 the rook on h1 is already in the game, and white wants to play queen d3 or e3 bishop d3, it's not so good. So instead we take the knight on c3, doubling white pawns, b takes c3, and we take the pawn on c4. White plays e4, black has to defend the pawn. If black gives up the pawn, then of course he'll do worse. So b5, knight e5, and for the moment simply bishop e6. So the idea is to play f6, and if white would give check on h5, then black can play g6. After knight takes g6, bishop f7. So just to illustrate, for example, if let's say white plays a4, black can play f6, queen h5, g6, knight takes g6 and bishop f7. And black wins, because knight on g6 is pinned. So white has to do something, and one possibility for him is to play f4. This is the strongest move also. So now, of course, after f6, white will play f5. This is unpleasant. So instead of f6, black plays queen a5. So white has his own problems. So he played h4, f4, it's very nice, yes, it's active, but on the queen side he has only weaknesses, so c3 is one of them. Now f5, if now rook c1, then f6 works already. And here is why. f5, bishop g8, queen h5, and simply king d8. And white loses a piece. It's not enough compensation even after knight f7, bishop takes f7, queen takes f7. F takes g5, the position of white is lost. So rook c1 is not so good. Instead, if white plays f5, then he gives up too much. Queen takes c3, king f2, and now again f6. Rook c1, queen goes to a3, f takes e6. Note interesting variation, if instead white gives check on g6, black has very strong response g6. Queen h5, g6. F takes g6, and now king d8 suddenly. And the position of black is won. So queen h5 doesn't work, f takes e6, and f takes e5. And again, black is better. So after d takes e5, for example, he has queen c5 check, bishop e3, and queen takes e5. And then he captures the pawn on e6. Queen d7, of course, doesn't work because of knight takes d7. So there's no threat of checkmate. And black has captured almost all the pawns. So this is what happens after h4. If you decide to play this line, and if you want to be more confident, of course you need to double check all the variations with computer, because this is a position where you cannot just play based on common sense. Here you need to know move by move what happens. So it's always good advice to see what computer will tell you. So knight e4. Now if knight takes e4, then d takes e4. Knight takes e4 is the idea of American Grandmaster Leonid Kritz, but fortunately for black he doesn't have any problems here. Queen takes d4, queen c2. Now black has to find the way how to equalize in the most efficient way. And this is achieved by playing queen e5, bishop e3, and bishop f5. Queen b3, queen goes to c7, g3, knight d7, bishop g2, and it is the easiest, instead of playing knight f6 or something weakening squares b6, the easiest way is to play e6. Knight takes e4. Surprisingly, black takes on e4. In the next move you will see why. Bishop takes e4 and knight c5. And we are done. Bishop takes c5, bishop takes c5. This is, of course, draw. So, now let's see what happens after bishop f4 in move number 6. Bishop goes back. Black takes on c3, b takes c3. If you look at the position, white has already two pieces developed, black has none, so black has to take on c4. This is where the idea of the move a6 becomes visible. Whenever black takes on c4, his pawn on a6 is already well positioned, because in the next move black can play b5 and then immediately bishop b7, so the pawn on b5 is protected one more time. a6 is always a good move when you play positions like this one with taking on c4. White can play g3 and e4. If he plays e4, then standard reaction, of course, b5, knight e5, and now simply bishop e6. The idea is the same as in the previous line with h4, where I showed you black wants to play f6, and after queen h5, g6, and then bishop f7. So, for example, a4, f6, knight has to go back to f3, just to repeat this, knight takes g6 and bishop f7, black wins. Knight f3, bishop goes to f7, so the white squares are not really weakened, the bishop protects them. A takes b5, c takes b5, white plays d5. Now he wants to play knight d4, and then he takes the control over the square e6, which is not so nice. So we play e5 ourselves immediately. D takes e6, queen takes d1, rook takes d1, bishop takes e6, knight d4, and bishop f7 or bishop d7, it doesn't really matter. Bishop d7 might be even better, with idea knight c6. In both cases, the position of black is better. White doesn't have enough compensation for sacrifice pawn. So this is what happens if white decides to play with e4. This is not a big problem. Now g3, this is more dangerous because white puts his bishop on the long diagonal, and then whenever black plays b5, knight e5 follows, the diagonal is open, and the bishop on g2 becomes strong. So black has to take more care here. He plays b5, bishop g2, bishop b7. Here the bishop shouldn't go to e6, of course. Bishop goes to b7. Now pawn c6 is well protected. Knight e5. Black plays e6. There are possible variations with f6, but then white has a not obvious sacrifice. Knight takes c4, b takes c4, and rook b1. The bishop cannot go from b7 because knight on b8 hangs. And this is kind of a problem for black. Rook a7 doesn't work because of bishop takes b8, queen takes b8, bishop takes c6. So this position might be not so nice to play. Queen c8 is probably the only move, but even then white has compensation. So that's why f6 is not the first choice. Instead, black can simplify the game. He plays simply e6, rook b1. If white plays a4, then queen c8. This is another standard move, protecting the bishop b7. Now whenever white takes on b5, c takes b5 follows, exchanging the bishops. So that's not a problem. Instead of a4, rook b1. This seems more dangerous because now white wants to take on c4. Queen c8 again. Short castle. Knight goes to d7. e4. Knight takes e5. Bishop takes e5. f6. Bishop has to go back to e4. Queen h5 of course doesn't work because of g6. And then the next move, black takes the bishop e5. So bishop goes to f4 and bishop a3. This is the best square for the bishop because it blocks white from playing a4. So now white should play queen h5, g6, queen h6, preventing black from castling. Queen d7, bishop c1, bishop f8, queen f4, and if you want to play for win, you can play bishop g7. Then you need to take in consideration that white can play bishop a3, black plays king f7 and rook e8. If this is not what you want, then you can, after queen f4, simply play bishop e7, and white doesn't have a better choice than to play queen h6 back. Otherwise, black simply castles and keeps the extra power. So queen h6, bishop f8 with a draw. So this is everything with the line bishop g5. As you have seen, these positions are already a little bit more problematic, so you need to know that you have to play knight e4. Then after h4 you need to know to take on c3, take on c4, play bishop e6. So these are so small details. But overall, again, black doesn't have real troubles. They will come later. Alright, I hope you liked this part, and I will see you in the next one.